And I work at Human Rights Law Network, and I work in the Reproductive Rights Initiative. And I'm actually really happy that reproductive rights has been put under the scope of gender justice and not under the scope of health. Because reproductive rights is very closely related to health rights, but it's mainly an issue of overcoming patriarchy. It's mainly an issue of self-determination for women. It's mainly an issue of autonomy for women. And that's why it belongs in gender justice and not necessarily regulated to the right to health exclusively. And so I want to share with you all what reproductive rights are. Here is what we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about reproductive rights as a concept and as a set of rights that each individual has. I'm going to introduce the major issues that are reproductive rights issues in India and in the region and in the world. I'm going to talk about HRLN's reproductive rights litigation, mostly PILs, but also some writ petitions. And then I'm going to talk about developments at the domestic level, regional level, and international level. And then finally, some of the challenges to litigating on this issue and advocating on this issue more broadly. And I'm very excited to have a discussion and dialogue with all of you after, because all of the countries we work in face similar but also very different reproductive rights issues. And the pictures are here to keep your eyeballs stimulated. They may not always correspond with what the slide is, so I'll try to explain them. This is of a child marriage, which is a major reproductive rights issue, I think, in all of the countries represented here. Maybe not the United States. Okay. So, what are reproductive rights? It's a very expansive definition. It is the right of all couples and individuals to decide freely and responsibly the number, spacing, and timing of their children. It is the right to have the information and the means to make these decisions. It is the right to the highest standard of reproductive health. It is the right to make decisions concerning reproduction free of discrimination, coercion, and violence. And now why is this important? In the context where we have torture, where we have extrajudicial killings, where we have mass militarization, horrific prison conditions, why do we care about this? And to me it's very obvious because I spend all day, every day working on this, but I hope that I can communicate to you why it's also something very important to work on. And the first has to do with what the first speaker talked about, which is about patriarchy and overcoming patriarchy. Because when we control women's decisions about their bodies, and when we limit women's rights regarding their own reproduction, we use women as objects of control. And that means either we limit the number of children a woman can have, we encourage a woman to have more children, we don't give a woman access to the tools she needs to determine what she wants for her family. So it's about overcoming this patriarchy, and it's about overcoming inequality. And that's something that we're all concerned about, regardless of what area of the law we work in. The second thing is that it is about healthcare. And healthcare is something that all of us, that all of our parents, all of our children, all of our brothers and sisters will need it someday. The fact of the matter is everyone in this room was born. And many of the people in this room will give birth or have given birth. And we're all going to interact with the healthcare system at some point in our lives. And maternal health care and reproductive health care are an essential part to our livelihoods. And the last reason why this is important is it really is a matter of life and death. Women die when they don't have access to adequate health care. Am I speaking way too quickly, by the way? No. Okay. Women die when they don't have access to adequate abortion services. Women die when the roads are not sufficient to take them from their home to the hospitals to have a baby. So this is just as serious as the death penalty. It's just as serious as extrajudicial killings because women are dying. And there is no leading cause of death in any of the countries represented here for men in the same age group as in the reproductive age group for women. Meaning, women die from maternal mortality at astounding rates. And there's no corresponding cause of death for men in that same age group that kills as many men every year. So this is something that we all need to get passionate about immediately. And the courts, I know most of us in here are advocates or work in the legal sphere. The courts across pretty much all countries, all regions, and the international level have been huge proponents of furthering and expanding the scope of reproductive rights for women. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about. But here are some of the issues that we cover in the Reproductive Rights Unit at HRLN and that are under the scope of reproductive rights generally. So you have the right to health, you have discrimination based on sex, We have sexual rights, reproductive rights, which I gave you the definition for. The right to food. Anemia is one which is caused by malnutrition, is one of the leading causes of maternal mortality, as is poverty. You have tuberculosis, which complicates childbirth as well. Housing, child marriage. Women who marry early, girls who marry early have a significantly higher rate of dying during pregnancy, have a lower lifespan as well, have less control over their own fertility. HIV/AIDS, we have many cases of women who are HIV positive, who go to deliver, who are discriminated against, who don't get proper treatment, and the virus then passes to their fetus. Malaria, which is one of the biggest contributing factors to maternal mortality in India, especially in the Northeast. Contraception, access to contraception, the sex ratio, which in India has been falling steadily. Surrogacy, what some people label as rent a womb. Clinical trials on reproductive drugs and drugs on adolescents. Vaccine trials and vaccines in general. And of course, all the different intersections that were talked about earlier, including caste issues, tribal issues. Extremely marginalized communities obviously are affected by reproductive rights violations more than privileged communities. And the picture here is of Sanjay Sharma, who works in health rights, doing a fact-finding with a pregnant woman who delivered in the streets of Delhi in CP. So one of the biggest issues that we work on is maternal mortality. So India doesn't have the highest maternal mortality rate in the world, but India is responsible for the largest number of maternal deaths every year, which is about 20% of the global average. Right now, the MMR, which is the maternal mortality rate, is at about 240, 220, 200, depending on which statistics you look at. In some states in India, like Assam, the maternal mortality rate is 480. And that means for every 100,000 live births, 480 women die. Chad has the highest maternal mortality rate in the world at 1,100 women dying for every 100,000 live births. So in India, 1 in 70 women is at a risk for maternal mortality, and a woman will die every 8 minutes. Every 8 minutes. So you can think about what that amounts to even during the time you sat here or during the time you ate lunch. I put up the numbers here. These are just from the World Bank for, I think, for the countries that are here. Afghanistan is at 460, Bangladesh 240, Pakistan 260, Sri Lanka is often used as the model for the region because it has a very low maternal mortality rate at 53. Nepal is at 170, and the U.S., where I am from, is at 21, which has actually increased in the past few years. Many countries in Europe, Estonia has the best rate in the world, just to put this in perspective for you, at 3. And like I said, Chad and many countries in Africa have very high rates in the thousands or 900, something like that. So this means that we're losing a huge chunk of the population. And because in all of the countries represented here, the age of marriage is quite low, we're losing very young women to an early maternal death. Women who can contribute to society, women who can go on to get a great education. We're losing these women before they have the opportunity to actually make a difference in our societies. The saddest part about all of this is at least 75, and some people say 80 or 90% of all maternal deaths are completely preventable. Where you have adequate antenatal care, delivery care, and post-delivery care, as well as the infrastructure to support all of that. So you can say that these deaths are not from negligence, they're not from carelessness, they're not from just poor nutrition. These are by design. These are by design, because if the government knows that this is happening, if we know that these deaths are preventable, you shift from going to an unfortunate side effect of poverty to something that is intentional, right? It's not negligence anymore when you know you can prevent it by taking easy steps. And obviously, maternal mortality evokes a lot of fundamental rights. You have the right to life, the right to health, which under international standards has to be adequate, accessible, acceptable, and quality care. The right to dignity. If you've ever been in a delivery room in a public hospital in India, you'll see nurses scolding the women and telling them they're ugly, telling them that they didn't do their hair properly, how did they get themselves pregnant, in full public view of everyone. So dignity is also a huge part of this. The right to be free from cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment, and of course, gender discrimination. Because men will never be on a table with their genitals exposed to people all around, being told that they didn't dress properly for a childbirth. Abortion is another really big reproductive rights issue. Termination of pregnancy is a very simple medical procedure, and 1/5 of all the pregnancies in India are unwanted or unplanned. Mostly that's because people don't have access to adequate contraception. And that means that a lot of people want to terminate those unwanted pregnancies, which in India, under the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, is legal. 2/3 of all of the abortion procedures in India are unsafe, which means that they can result in permanent disability, infertility, or even in the worst cases, death. And abortion today is one of the highest contributors to India's maternal mortality rate. Every hour, 8 women and girls will die from unsafe abortions, which leads to 18,000 women every year just in India. This obviously evokes the right to life, again, the right to health, the right to reproductive autonomy, being able to have a choice over the reproductive actions that happen with your body, and the right to be free from cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. This is a delivery room in Tamil Nadu. Coercive population control is another big issue we work on. Here we have a picture from a sterilization camp. This is a woman recovering from her sterilization surgery. So in India, female sterilization, which is a tubectomy where a doctor performs an invasive surgery to cut a woman's fallopian tubes and tie them so she can no longer become pregnant, is the #1 form of birth control in India. And that's again largely because there is no access to other forms of contraception. Most of the field health level workers in India have a target. And that means that every year they have to get 50 women into a sterilization camp. Every public health facility also has its own target. And the women who go in for a sterilization are paid, the nurse who recruits them for the sterilization is paid, and the government, the money that comes from the center government to the state government largely funds sterilization. I know that this is an interesting issue across different countries. Like I know Sri Lanka just recently outlawed sterilization because, again, there you have the opposite thing, where it's a push for people to have more babies. But in either way, you're still coercing women by limiting their choices or by giving them incentives that really give them no other option. And here, we also have been seeing an increase in hysterectomies, unnecessary or unethical hysterectomies, where a woman's basically entire reproductive system is taken out before an appropriate age. One of the biggest issues when it comes to coercive population control is that there's no informed consent. And that means when a woman has her 3rd child, the doctors in the hospital, of course, assuming that she has at least 1 boy of those 3 children, because if she has 3 girls, that means go, go, go until you get a boy. But once she has those 3 children, the doctor will say, it's time for you to get your surgery. Please come into the, and they'll operate on them pretty much immediately without telling them about condoms, without telling them about birth control pills, without telling them about intrauterine devices, without telling them about all of the other options that they have. And that's not informed consent, which is necessary under the law and under Union of India guidelines. The other thing about this is that it affects a very specific population, which is poor people. Marginalized people are the largest acceptors of sterilization in India. So the rights under coercive population control that are touched are the right to life, the right to health, the right to bodily integrity, the right to reproductive autonomy,